Wyoming Territory, October 1873. The wind was sharp as a blade that evening, slicing down from the bighorns and driving a cold silence across the dry land. Orion Vance had just finished mucking the last stall when he saw the figure walking up the road alone, dust-covered, and limping slightly. He stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The woman stopped at the gate, her coat too thin, her boots scuffed to ruin. Her cheeks were red from the wind, and her gaze flicked up to meet his like she had already measured the distance between hope and pride. "Evenin'," she said, voice steady but raw. "I need a place to sleep, just for tonight. The barn's fine if you've got room." Orion said nothing at first. He studied her. She was young 20s, maybe, but her eyes looked older, tired, and she carried a canvas satchel that hung like it had been dragged through hell. "You running from something?" he asked. She hesitated. "No, just heading somewhere else." He nodded once, quiet. Then he stepped aside and motioned toward the house. "You can sleep in my bed if you want." The words came out more honest than he'd planned. He saw her stiffen, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. Then he added, "I'll take the floor. It's warmer than the barn." She looked at him a long moment, not like she was frightened, more like she was deciding if she could trust him. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I'm Beatrice Jones," she said, voice softer now. "Thank you." Orion tipped his hat. Orion Vance. They walked the short path to the house in silence. The porch creaked beneath their boots. Inside, the fire was still burning low from earlier. He stoked it higher, then stepped aside so she could warm up. She took off her coat and sat in front of the hearth, holding her hands close to the flames. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." He ladled stew from a pot on the stove, poured water from the pump into a tin cup, and set both in front of her. She ate like someone who had gone without too often, quietly, gratefully. They did not speak again until she set the empty bowl down. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Been that way a while. Family." He looked at the fire. "All gone now." Beatrice nodded. "Same." That was all. No details, no questions. Just silence and the crackle of wood. Later, while she stood by the window watching the moon rise over the hills, he laid out a bedroll on the floor beside the hearth. He set a pillow down, then glanced her way. "The bed's clean," he said. "Sheets were washed 2 days ago." She turned, her expression unreadable, but she walked over, picked up her satchel, and stepped into the bedroom without a word. The door stayed open. Orion lay down on the floor, staring at the ceiling beams. He did not sleep much. In the morning, Beatrice was gone. The bed was made. Her satchel missing. But on the table sat a folded scrap of paper and a $50 coin. "Thank you, B." He read it twice, then let out a breath and scratched the back of his neck. He figured that was the end of it. But 2 days later she came back. It was near dusk again. The wind quieter, but the sky heavy with clouds. Orion was fixing a broken fence post when the same figure appeared over the ridge. She walked slower this time. Her boots were even worse off. And her left hand was wrapped in a strip of dirty cloth. He dropped the hammer and crossed the yard fast. "What happened?" "Just a bad step." She held up the hand. "Cut it on a rock, needed to wash it." He looked at her face. Her skin was pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You need a doctor." "No, just a place to rest." He stepped aside again. "Come inside." This time she did not argue. He cleaned her hand with boiled water and wrapped it in clean cloth. She winced but did not complain. "You should stay a while," he said when he finished. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you look like you need to." Beatrice stared at the fire, then nodded once. "Just a few days." That night she slept in the bed again. He stayed on the floor. By the 3rd day she was out in the barn helping with the horses. She knew how to hold a bridle, how to calm a skittish mare. Orion watched her from across the corral, arms folded. "You ever work with horses before?" "I used to," she said. "My father had a team." Before she stopped, looked down, before everything. He did not push. Just nodded and handed her a brush. They worked side by side that afternoon, and something in the quiet between them changed. It was not loud. It did not need to be. That night after dinner, Orion brought out an old deck of cards. They played by lantern light. She laughed once low and surprised, and he watched her smile like it was the first time she had remembered how he liked her laugh. He liked the way she looked when she relaxed, when the weight she carried fell away for a moment. "You always this kind to strangers?" she asked. "No," he said simply. Then added, "You do not feel like a stranger." Beatrice set her cards down, eyes flicking to his. "I have not felt safe in a long time," she said, "but I do here." That was the first night he did not sleep on the floor. She did not ask. He did not assume. But when they both stood at the doorway to the bedroom, neither moved away. She looked up at him, her eyes soft, and he reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yes." They lay side by side, not touching at first. But in the dark, her hand found his, and he held it. Not tight, just enough to say he was there. Neither of them let go. The first snow came early that year, a brittle, powdery layer that didn't stick long but whispered that winter was close behind. Orion woke with Beatrice's back pressed lightly to his chest, her breathing even, her hand still folded in his. He didn't move. He just watched the pale morning light creep across the floorboards and listened to the wind tapping gently at the glass. She stirred only when the wood in the stove popped sharp enough to echo. Her fingers tensed slightly in his, but she didn't pull away. "I dreamt I was standing in a river," she murmured, eyes still closed. "The water was frozen under my feet, but I wasn't cold." He waited, not sure if she was finished. She turned then slowly and looked up at him. "You ever have dreams like that where everything's still but makes sense anyway?" "I don't remember most of mine," he said. "But I like the sound of yours." She smiled faintly, then sat up and reached for her blouse draped over the chair. "I should help with the woodpile today. You said the back stack was low." He didn't ask her to. She didn't offer it like a favor. It was just a shared understanding work needed doing, and she'd do it. By midday, they'd split enough logs to fill the back wall of the shed. Her hand was slow from the cut, but she favored her good side and didn't complain. Orion noticed the way she paused between swings, scanning the tree line now and then like she expected something to show itself. "You watching for someone?" he asked. She wiped her brow with the sleeve of her shirt. "No one in particular, just a habit, I guess." He didn't press. Instead, he handed her a fresh piece of kindling and changed the subject. "There's a canyon 2 miles north, where the wind whistles through like it's got something to say. Been meaning to take the horses out there before it ices over." She leaned on the axe handle. "I'd like to see that." They rode out after the midday meal, the sun low and thin behind a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to clear or snow again. Her horse was one of the lighter mares, gentle but quick-footed. She rode steady, reins loose, as though the saddle had always belonged to her. The canyon was narrow and steep-walled, worn smooth by centuries of water and time. The air shifted as they entered, and true to Orion's word, the wind hummed along the rock, a low sound like a voice caught in a throat. Beatrice dismounted and walked ahead, boots crunching against frosted stones. She placed her hand against the canyon wall, fingers tracing the grooves. "My mother used to say wind carried memory, that places remember what happened to them." He stood beside her, watching the way her eyes tracked across the stone. She was half Cheyenne. Her mother was taken before she was born, but she kept the old stories anyway, even if they were only pieces. Orion nodded. That's a good thing to carry. She didn't answer right away. When she turned to face him, her expression had changed. You're the first person I've told that to. He didn't take it lightly. I'll keep it safe. They stood there a while longer, just listening. The wind shifted again, higher this time, like a song caught between two ridgelines. When they rode back, the sun had already dipped behind the distant hills. The barn lantern swung in the breeze as they unsaddled the horses. Beatrice brushed down her mare slowly, her gaze fixed on the animal's flank. He wasn't always cruel, she said suddenly. My husband. Orion didn't move. He waited. Not at first. He was older but kind, gave me a pair of gloves my first winter with him, said my hands were too fine for chopping ice. She paused. By the third winter, he didn't speak to me unless he had to. By the fourth, he made me sleep outside. Orion's fingers tightened on the bridle strap. I left when he threw a cup at me. Missed, but it broke against the stove. I waited until he passed out, packed what I could, and walked south till I found a wagon heading toward Fort Laramie. Paid the driver with a silver brooch I'd kept hidden in my boot. She looked up then, eyes calm but unflinching. I don't want pity, I just don't want to lie. You're not a liar, Orion said, and you don't need to explain yourself to me. I know, she said quietly. But I want you to know who's sleeping in your bed. He stepped closer, close enough she could feel the weight of his presence without touching him. I've never asked for anyone else to be there. That ought to count for something. That night, she set her satchel on the floor and unpacked it for the first time. A wrapped bundle of sewing needles, a handkerchief with faded blue stitching, a dog-eared booklet of psalms, and a single, bent picture of a stern-faced woman in a high collar. Beatrice laid them gently on the table beside the bed, as if anchoring herself to the room. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at him. You think you'll stay out here forever? She asked. I never planned much beyond tomorrow, he said. But I've been thinking more about the days after. She pulled back the blanket and lay down, one hand reaching toward him. Then let's see what the days after look like. He took her hand and slid in beside her, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek and the quiet steadiness in her gaze. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. The wind carried the scent of snow the next morning, though the sky held off. Orion stood on the porch sharpening a draw knife while Beatrice sat nearby, mending a torn sleeve from one of his shirts with small, precise stitches. The quiet between them wasn't heavy, it moved like breath, easy and known. I could build a frame for that spinning wheel I found in the shed, she said, not looking up from her work. The legs are split, but the wheel's sound. That wheel's been leaning against the wall since my mother died, Orion replied. Didn't figure on anyone fixing it. Then it's waited long enough. He wiped the blade clean and slid it into his belt. I'll find time this week. There's scrap pine under the lean-to. She folded the shirt neatly, placed it in the basket beside her and asked, You ever think about selling horses again? I used to, he said, but I'd need help breaking them proper. She lifted her eyes. I'd help. He paused at that. She didn't say it like a favor, just a fact. He nodded once and stepped off the porch, heading toward the corral without another word. She followed. The new gelding, a copper-colored 2-year-old with a narrow blaze, had been standoffish since Orion brought him down from the high pastures. Beatrice walked slowly toward the gate, careful not to square her shoulders. The horse tossed its head once, gave a half-step back, then paused. You're not trying to catch him, Orion said, leaning against the fence. No, she answered. I'm letting him see I'm not here to make demands. The gelding's ears flicked forward. She stopped a few feet away and waited. Orion watched as the horse stepped closer, nose twitching toward her sleeve. You read animals the way some folks read scripture, he said. She looked over her shoulder. Maybe animals make more sense. Later, they brought the saddle out not to ride, but to let the horse see it, smell it. Beatrice moved slow, steady, never reaching before he was ready. By dusk, the gelding stood quiet under her hand, flank rising and falling like a bellows. They walked back to the house without speaking. The warmth inside welcomed them with the smell of roasted squash and onions. Orion had lit the fire while she'd put the tools away. "You always cook quiet like that?" she asked, sitting across from him at the table. "Habit." She picked up her spoon. "It's good. You use tallow, bear fat, from last winter's kill." She nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "My uncle used to say you could taste the land in the meat if you knew what to listen for." He considered that. "This land's been quiet a long time. Maybe it's waiting for someone to answer." After supper, she took the lamp into the bedroom and returned with a notebook, the pages yellowed and soft at the corners. "You write?" he asked. She shook her head. "My mother did. Bits of story, some plant lore. I've been adding to it since she passed." He reached for the book, paused. "May I?" She handed it over, watching him as he turned the pages. Her handwriting was tighter than her mother's, more deliberate. He didn't read aloud, just nodded now and then, taking it in. "You know a lot about roots," he said. "Enough to keep someone from dying of their own pride." He smiled, setting the book down gently. "You ever think of teaching? There's a church school in Casey. Half the children there can't tell poplar bark from willow. I'd need to stay put for that." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I've got no cause to leave." The lamp flickered. She looked around the room slowly, the way someone might test the feel of a place not just with their eyes, but with parts of themselves that remembered too much. "I don't trust easy," she said. "I don't ask it of you," he replied. "But I want to," she added, eyes steady on his. He stood then, crossed the room, and rested a hand over hers on the table. "Then take your time. I'll still be here." She turned her palm up beneath his, fingers threading between. Outside, the wind had settled. The night stretched long and quiet across the land, but inside the walls of the house, something had shifted, small, sure, and no longer waiting. The first real snow came in the middle of the night. Orion woke to the sound of it brushing against the windows like the soft hush of a broom. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the floorboards, but the bed was warm, and Beatrice's shoulder was pressed against his, her breath steady against his collarbone. By morning, the land was blanketed clean. The fences, the ridge, the barn roof all softened under white. Orion pulled on his coat and boots, stepped carefully onto the porch, and stood a while watching the sky hold its hush. Inside, Beatrice had started tea with dried yarrow. She poured 2 mugs, set them on the table, then opened the notebook again, adding a line in her mother's looping hand. "Snow's heavy but dry," she said without looking up. "Won't stay past 3 days. You always this sure?" Orion asked, sitting across from her. "I watch the crows. When they fly low and quiet, the storm's already spent." He watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "You ever think about what you'd plant come spring?" She closed the book. "I haven't thought about spring in years." "Well," he said, "we've got a patch of good soil behind the barn. My mother used to grow beans and onions. I could build you a cold frame, keep the roots from freezing too deep." Her mouth curved slightly as she picked up her mug. "You offering me a garden?" "I'm offering you ground you can call yours," he said. She glanced down at the steam curling from her tea. "You don't know how long I've been walking without that." They didn't speak for a while after that. The quiet between them had grown easier, not empty but full of things they both understood. That afternoon, a man rode up from the south trail. His coat was dusted in snow, his beard thick with frost, and a rifle slung behind his saddle. Orion stepped out first, hand resting near his hip. Beatrice stood just behind the door, her face unreadable. The rider raised a gloved hand. Name's Calder. I trade supplies through the basin. Heard from the postmaster in Casey there might be a need for sugar and salt out this way. Orion nodded once. We're stocked for now, but if you come back after thaw, I could use more nails and lamp oil. Calder looked past him. You the only one living here, Beatrice stepped forward before Orion could answer. We both do. Calder gave her a long look, then tipped his hat. Ma'am. He didn't linger. After he left, Orion turned to her, but she was already brushing snow off the porch rail. You know him? He asked. No, her voice was quiet. But I've met men like him. They don't ask what they already know unless they're measuring something. You think he'll talk? She met his eyes. Let him. I'm not hiding anymore. That night, she pulled the quilt up beneath her chin and lay still, her hand resting just above his heart. My name used to be Beatrice Grafton, she said, before I took back my mother's. He looked at her in the firelight. You don't owe me any part of your past. I know, she said, but I want you to know the name I buried so you understand the one I kept. He reached up and traced the line of her jaw with 2 fingers. Beatrice Jones fits. She closed her eyes. It does now. The following days passed slow, the way winter demands. They moved through their chores with a rhythm that hadn't been there before. She stitched new leather straps for the sleigh harness. He repaired the porch step that had warped under the freeze. When they spoke, it was with the ease of 2 people who didn't need to fill the air with noise. One morning, he found her in the barn loft, sitting cross-legged beside the old spinning wheel. The frame was upright now, patched with pine and cedar. She was winding raw wool through her fingers with a focus so deep she didn't hear him come up. You fixed it, he said. I did. You planned to spin all winter. I plan to make something that lasts. He sat beside her, the hay rustling under his weight. You think you'll stay come spring? She turned her face toward the open loft doors, where the snow was starting to melt into the edges of the pasture. I think I already have. He didn't answer. Just reached for her hand and held it, palm to palm, as the last of the snow slipped quietly from the eaves. By late February, the earth began to shift beneath the snow. Not loudly, just the way roots stir beneath thaw, quiet and steady. The horses shed their coats earlier than expected, and in the mornings, Beatrice stood at the edge of the pasture with her hands in her pockets, watching the mist lift off the hills like breath held too long. She no longer looked over her shoulder. Orion noticed it first in the way she moved through the house unhurried, as though she belonged there. She'd taken to keeping the kettle on through the morning so the water wouldn't go cold, and she'd started leaving her shawl draped over the back of his chair instead of folded away. He hadn't said anything about it. He didn't need to. The day they rode into Casey, the road was soft under the horses' hooves, the last of the ice running thin down the ditches. Orion needed seed for the spring planting, and Beatrice had agreed to come for company, not protection. Folks in town still watched her, but less than before. She held her chin level and met their eyes without flinching. At the supply store, she asked for buttons without looking at the clerk. The man behind the counter hesitated before answering. We've got brass and bone, he said. But no shell left. She chose bone, paid in coin, and turned to find Orion watching her with something unreadable in his face. You all right? He asked once they stepped outside. Felt like I was burning the first minute, she said. But then it passed. They didn't linger in town. Back at the homestead, she laid the new buttons on the table and started replacing the cracked ones on Orion's coat. He sat beside her, sharpening the edge of a wood plane. You ever miss where you were born? He asked. No, she said. But I miss who I was before I had to leave it. Think she's still in there? Beatrice looked up. Some days I feel her, most days I feel new. He set the plane down and reached for her hand. I like who you are now. She didn't answer. She leaned over and kissed him, slow and certain, then rested her head against his shoulder. By mid-March, the creek behind the north pasture had overflowed its bank. Orion built a new channel with stones and Beatrice packed the edges with straw and clay. They worked until dusk, hands raw and clothes damp, and afterward she peeled off her gloves, flexing her fingers by the fire. "You ever think about building on?" she asked. "To the house?" She nodded. "A room with light. I could set up a frame, maybe a loom if I had one. Save the spinning wheel for finer thread." "I can draw up something," he said. "Won't be fancy." "I don't need fancy, just space to make something that's mine." That spring they planted together. Onion sets in neat rows, beans against the fence line, potatoes in the far bed where the soil was deeper. She pressed each seed into the ground with care, never hurried. He built a low fence to keep out rabbits, and she strung dried hair from the mares along the posts to keep away deer. One Sunday in April, he woke to the sound of her singing, soft and low. The words weren't in English, some half-remembered blend of Cheyenne and something older. She was boiling water over the stove, her back to him, hair loose down her back. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. When she turned, she didn't startle. "I didn't know you were awake." "I didn't want to interrupt." She poured him tea, set it on the table, and sat across from him. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what name to keep." He reached for the cup. "You don't owe me an answer," she shook her head. "I want one. I want something that fits what I've built here." "And what's that?" She looked at him fully then, no hesitation. "A life that's mine and yours. One we chose." They married that summer beneath the cottonwoods out by the creek, where the water ran full and clear. No preacher, just hands joined and promises spoken low between two people who'd already lived the hard part of their vows. Calder passed through again a week after and left a sack of flour and a jug of molasses without a word. Folks in Casey started nodding when they saw Beatrice on market days. A few asked about her remedies. One woman brought her a swatch of old fabric and asked if she'd ever consider teaching needlework to the girls. Orion built her the room she wanted. South-facing window, a shelf for herbs, a frame for weaving. She filled it with quiet industry thread, cloth, the hush of things made with care. They grew older, slowly, with the land. Winters came and passed, planting turned to harvest, and the house filled with warmth that didn't come from fire alone. There were hard days, but no more running. One morning, years later, Orion stood at the edge of the pasture watching the horses graze. Beatrice came up beside him, her shawl wrapped tight, hair streaked with silver now. "Frost's early this year," she said. He nodded. "We'll manage." She leaned into him, her arm warm against his. "We always do." And they did hand in hand, heart to heart, through every season that came. A life not untouched by sorrow, but never again ruled by it. A life built slow, stitched tight, and bound by the kind of love that needed no proof but time.